Gold dig _ mom stole my entire college fund for her fourth wedding. Gold digger mom stole my entire college fund for her fourth wedding, so I crashed the ceremony wearing a custom t-shirt, exposing her and got her arrested. I lost my grandma when I was 18. She was a tough, no-nonsense woman who ran her own upholstery business for 5 decades and raised 3 kids. My mom, being the middle child, often clashed with her. When I was young, I would often see my grandma and my mom fighting for small things and would wonder why, until I realized that my grandma hated my mother because of me. For context, according to my aunt, my parents never really wanted me. They harbored resentment towards me from the moment I came into the world. For the initial 6 months of my life, I lived with her and my grandma. However, when I started growing up, my grandma forced my parents to buckle up and take responsibility. As a child, I remember, I was subjected to numerous derogatory names by my parents, particularly from my dad, like Bimbo or Dumbo if I made a slight mistake, which was really hurtful to hear. Interestingly, despite these labels, I happened to be the most academically inclined among my cousins. Thanks to my parents' encouragement from a young age, I've developed a passion for doing a science degree. My parents would beat me up for what seemed like trivial reasons, such as wearing nail polish or talking to a boy. My dad never let me wear makeup, disapproved of my tight clothes even if it's just yoga pants with a long shirt, and basically anything associated with being a girl. Keep in mind that I was still growing and his controlling nature affected me a lot. When my parents used to fight, it always seemed to somehow become my fault. On top of that, my mom consistently complained that I didn't contribute around the house. The reality was that I was taught from a very early age to help them out. I folded at least 2 loads of laundry every day, cleaned one of the bathrooms daily, handled the dishes, and took care of various other chores like sweeping the floors. Despite all this, I never uttered a complaint about it, but my parents never appreciated it. It felt like I was an unappreciated maid at their home. Back then, I used to do most of the things my parents told me to do, and avoided anything they didn't mention. I refrained from drinking, stayed away from drugs, and made sure not to wear what they deemed exposing clothes. Unfortunately, I wasn't allowed to go out with friends even for birthdays, and having them over was also off limits. There were times when I'd come up with excuses to stay later at school during the daytime because I enjoyed spending time with others outside the confines of my home. However, everything changed when my dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer. Even though I hated my dad for always trying to control my life, I still didn't want him to die. But my mom clearly didn't think this way. She left my dad, saying she did not want to be stuck with an ill husband. My dad and I were shocked when we watched her pack her bags and leave. Later, my dad broke down sitting on the porch. Even though I was just 14 years old, I could understand his pain. I had always seen him sit and drink a beer on the porch whenever he was having a bad day, so when I heard him crying, I got him a beer from the fridge. My dad started bawling when he noticed that I was handing him the beer, and he understood that I was trying to comfort him in the only way I knew. Since that day, I don't know how or why, but everything changed between me and my dad. He was not rude or abusive to me anymore. I can even venture to say that he was a good father. After my mom left. In the following weeks, my parents got divorced, which was easy since my dad had a prenup with her and she could not take any alimony. By next month, my mom had already moved in with her new boyfriend, who was apparently her high school sweetheart, Morty. During this time, my mom hated having me for the weekends. Whenever my dad would drive me to drop me off, she would make up some excuses about why she could not see me the weekend. It really hurt me because it felt like my mom had divorced me along with my dad. Throughout all this, my grandma continued to visit me, and I loved spending time with her. She would call me and all my cousins once a month to have a sleepover at her house, which is still one of my favorite memories to date. 5 months after my parents' divorce, my mom got married again. Her high school sweetheart, Morty, bought a house for my mom in hopes that they could grow their family together. However, my mom had other plans. Whenever I would get to visit her, which was rare, I would always find my mom on her phone, giggling and talking to someone with not a care in the world. She would only cut off the call once it was time for Morty to come back home. Apparently, Morty eventually found out that she had been cheating with another guy and they had a huge fight. However, my mother managed to convince him that it was just a one-time mistake, so they stayed together. During this time, my dad's health was not improving from his cancer. In his last days, he would spend time with me as much as he could. I would come back home from school terrified, thinking something might have happened to him. Unfortunately, one night, my dad passed away in his sleep after months of chemo not working. My grandma and my dad's family were the first ones to reach me as I just could not stop crying. When my mom came over, she was alone and there was no Morty in sight. I did not know this then, but my mom had continued to talk to the other guy behind Morty's back, and he had finally left. Throughout my dad's funeral, my mom kept saying how my dad's death could not have come at a worse timing since she was already dealing with a lot. Everyone was so shocked and irritated by her callousness. When Dad's will was left, it was declared that all his assets would be going to me immediately. My mother seemed very interested to be back in my life. However, my grandma did not want me living with my mother, since she knew the kind of daughter she had raised. She knew my mother wanted me for the money my dad had left behind for me. She and my aunt helped me sell all my dad's assets so they could open a college trust fund in my name. However, because I was still a minor, my mother's name also had to be added. Meanwhile, Morty, my mom's husband, divorced her during this period, and since they had no prenup, she ended up with a substantial settlement. That's why Grandma warned her not to dip into my funds, emphasizing that she already had her own money. My mom agreed to this arrangement. When Mom and I started living together, it felt at first like I was living with a stranger. She had changed so much over the years, and not in a good way at all. All she ever did was behave like a teenager herself. She would get dressed up and go out every night. She would come back home late at night with strange men and take them into her bedroom. Every morning, I would walk into the kitchen and notice someone different. It became a daily routine. When I turned 16, my mom introduced me to her third husband, Joe. Right from the start, it was clear he didn't like me. His behavior towards me was mean and unnecessarily critical. Whenever I raised the issue with my mom, she confronted him, leading to even more covert and behind-the-back hostility. Then, when my brother arrived 10 months later, my mom's narrative shifted to paint Joe as a good person deep down, and that apparently he struggled to express himself. I was encouraged not to resent him, but to be more understanding. However, Joe has no issue showering love on my baby brother Brad. Oddly, my mom confided in me several times that she had nothing in common with Joe, but she had married him because he would provide us with a stable family. This was far from the truth, because my mom and Joe would have nasty fights, especially after Brad was born. Joe did not want my mother to spend any time with me and would yell at her if she was not anywhere near Brad. He would tell me things like how he wished I would have died with my dad or I lived with my grandma because he wanted his son to get all the love and attention. It was hurtful and mentally exhausting to live with them where I was clearly not wanted. Every time I would beg or question my mother about why she stayed with him, she would skillfully change the subject. One day, my mother and Joe left us with my grandma so they could go out with their mutual friends and have a good time.